17. Nicole Golemski. During what was supposed to be a normal traffic stop during the morning of New Year's Day 2023, a Wisconsin woman launched into a slurry of verbal abuse towards the Portage County deputy who pulled her over. Viral body cam footage featured 33-year-old Nicole Golemski acting confrontational toward the deputy along a road in Stevens Point. As he approached her window, she sarcastically commented on how he must not have anything better to do on New Year's. Golemski stayed hostile throughout the rest of the conversation. She even accused the police of entrapping and harassing her, and when the deputy asked her when she last smoked marijuana, she said it was none of your business. The disgruntled driver also commented on how she had some daddy issues and PTSD, and how she doesn't typically trust men. Viewers praised the deputy for staying remarkably calm throughout the entire interaction. He even kept his cool when Golemski called him a dirty, lazy cop, simply replying, "That's unfortunate for me." According to the Daily Mail, Golemski was pulled over for a suspended license. She reportedly had about 60 criminal charges, with a record dating as far back as 2007. Just a few days before the infamous traffic stop, she'd set up a GoFundMe page asking for donations because her child's father was deported to Mexico. But even if she was going through a tough time, most agreed that it was no excuse for her obnoxious behavior. 16. Blanca Gomez. In 2023, during a public meeting held in Victorville, California, local councilwoman Blanca Gomez tried to address something previously discussed during a closed session. That's when the mayor, Deborah Jones, interrupted her and said she was not allowed to discuss closed meeting topics during public meetings. But Gomez argued that she had a right to do so thanks to freedom of speech. After calling a short 5-minute recess, Jones explained to the audience that it's against the law for council members to reveal closed meeting topics, which are considered confidential. She gave Gomez another chance to speak, with a warning to follow the rules. Gomez then reapproached the podium and started talking about how her fellow council members were conspiring against her. The visibly frustrated mayor quickly muted the councilwoman's microphone and threatened to have her kicked out of the meeting if she kept acting disruptive. As you've probably already guessed, Gomez ignored the order and spoke to the crowd. With the city attorney's blessing, Jones had Gomez forcibly removed from the meeting. She continued talking to the audience as a pair of deputies handcuffed her and dragged her outside. This was not Gomez's first arrest in connection to political activities. She was accused of trespassing into a city hall building back in 2018. And in 2022, she was charged with several misdemeanors related to 2 separate incidents from the year prior, including an arrest during a city hall meeting. It's unclear whether she was ever charged after the most recent meeting was disrupted. 15. Dalton Jones. In October 2022, deputies in Aiken County, South Carolina, responded to a call from a woman claiming she'd been held against her will by a thief in Belvedere. Her relationship to 26-year-old Dalton Jones was not clear, but she accused the suspect of saving her credit card information and using it to buy an Apple Music subscription. When the woman confronted Jones about the purchase, he allegedly denied the allegation before flying into an unchecked rage. The victim then told deputies that Jones locked her in a bathroom and turned the shower on to drown out her calls for help, while verbally berating her and pushing her down to the floor. After finally escaping the bathroom, the woman ran out to her car and tried to flee the scene. She claimed that Jones caught up with her, took her phone, and punched her car repeatedly, eventually denting it. Jones allegedly fled the scene in his grandparents' minivan and was found several hours later in nearby Graniteville. Inside the car, police reportedly found a gun and a piece of foil that seemed to have been used for smoking fentanyl. The suspect was quickly booked into custody on suspicion of drug possession, unlawfully carrying a gun, domestic violence, kidnapping, and grand larceny. 14. Stephanie Bloodworth. In February 2022, Monroe County deputies pulled over the suspected drunk driver of a gray Tesla on Florida's Duck Key. According to several reports, the car narrowly avoided hitting a tree and a few pedestrians. The woman behind the wheel, 24-year-old Stephanie Bloodworth, initially sped off but was immediately stopped for a second time. She told law enforcement that her dad owned the island and repeatedly said that the deputies needed to talk with her father because they were on his property. Bloodworth went as far as saying that her dad needed to be at the scene before the deputies could take any further action. But she was given a sobering dose of reality when one of the police officers replied, "No, that's not how this works when you're 24 years old." Among the Florida Keys, Duck Key is a small island with a population of about 750. Stephanie was probably surprised when her father came to the scene and told her that she essentially dug her own hole and that she was in trouble because of her own behavior. Shortly before Bloodworth was put into a police cruiser and taken in for processing, her dad offered a few parting words, saying, "There's nothing I can do." He reassured his daughter that he would come to the police station to see her whenever he could, but that Stephanie would only make the situation worse if she continued to act out of line. The woman allegedly struggled to take a breathalyzer test after being put into custody. She was charged with DUI, resisting, fleeing police, and reckless driving. She posted a $110,000 bond and was eventually given permission to leave the U.S. to go on a cruise despite being out on probation. 13. Abdullah Kandil. Saudi Arabian-born abstract artist Abdullah Kandil is extremely successful, with paintings that sell for anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands each. But he raised several eyebrows in late 2014 when he took the liberty of painting a mural on the wall of his penthouse hotel room in Manhattan during a wild Halloween party. After spending all night on the painting, Kandil went to the front desk in a paint-splattered bathrobe and asked to extend his stay a couple more nights. A suspicious staff member quickly called the police, and he instead spent the night in jail for a vandalism charge. Speaking with Page 6 reporter Richard Johnson after his arrest, Kandil said that he was inspired to create the mural while he and his guests were busy celebrating life. He thought that the hotel employees just didn't like art and estimated the value of his mural at about $1.5 million. Kandil's lawyer at the time, Sal Strazulo, defended his client, stating, "If a mural by my client is vandalism, then Michelangelo is guilty of defacing the Sistine Chapel." Several months later, Kandil told the New York Post that the mural was painted over and that he covered the costs to do so. He said, "I didn't think the hotel would find it a negative thing that I grabbed a brush and shared my positive feelings on the wall." But the hotel apparently saw the situation from a different perspective, proving that there are other opinions on what constitutes art, even when it comes to the work of someone whose list of clients includes famous collectors. 12. Britney Simpson. 31-year-old Britney Simpson was enraged when her wealthy parents won a legal battle to evict her from their mansion in Charleston, South Carolina, back in 2017. Within days of the court granting the order, Britney fatally shot 66-year-old Robert Simpson in the chest in his bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning. She then threw the gun and her clothes into the water and claimed that an intruder committed the deed while her panicked sister called 911 and begged police officers to hurry to the scene. Britney's story wasn't adding up to investigators, who knew that the family had been dealing with what was later described as an escalating mental health crisis in the years leading up to the shooting. By nightfall, she was in custody on suspicion of murder and possession of a firearm. According to police reports, the Simpsons called for help in the past because of Britney's behavior during her manic episodes. She'd been committed to the emergency psychiatric room on at least 3 prior occasions. When she stopped contributing to the family's utility bills while living rent-free at the house, her parents reached their wits' end and decided they wanted her gone. Not long after Britney's arrest, police divers located the gun and clothing in the creek behind the family's home. In the meantime, the troubled woman remained held in jail without bail, where she reportedly received special treatment compared to other inmates. In a letter to local news station Live 5 News, another inmate claimed that Britney had access to special shoes, socks, and earplugs that other prisoners weren't allowed to have. She was also allowed to use someone's personal cell phone to call her mother in order to avoid having some conversations recorded. And she had access to a laptop, which her lawyer claimed was only for reviewing evidence related to her case. To avoid putting her family through a trial after they dealt with her dad's death, Britney took a plea deal and admitted to a reduced voluntary manslaughter charge. She was sentenced to serve 18 years in prison with credit for time served and a requirement to serve 85% of her time behind bars, which means she could be free after serving just 13 years. After she's released, the plea agreement will require her to undergo a mental health evaluation and receive any necessary treatment. 11. Eric Ross. 37-year-old used car salesman Eubenz Joseph was gunned down at his place of business in West Nyack, New York by an unhappy customer in November 2018. Upset about the condition of a Hyundai sedan that he bought from Joseph, Eric Ross drove to the car lot from his home in Delaware to confront the victim. Joseph told Ross that there was nothing he could do about the car. So the two men briefly exchanged words before Ross decided to shoot Joseph in front of two family members. He then fled the scene. The victim died from his injuries the next day, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. 5 years later, in 2023, a jury finally found Ross guilty of second-degree murder. After maintaining his innocence throughout the lengthy trial, he was extremely upset by the verdict, which his lawyer described as a miscarriage of justice. On the day of his sentencing, Ross refused to leave his jail cell. So the judge signed an order forcing him to attend the proceeding, and he was dragged down to the courthouse. As soon as the hearing started, Ross started shouting over the judge, claiming that the proceeding was somehow illegal. He ignored repeated warnings to quiet down, instead responding with smart comments like, "Make me be quiet," and "You can't stop me from talking." After a short recess, the judge warned Ross to start behaving. The defendant just stated that he had no plans to do so, so he was placed in a separate room, allowing the hearing to continue without disruption. To the prosecutor, this type of behavior is a shining example of how Ross is incapable of being rehabilitated and why he should spend his life in prison. In addition to showing a lack of remorse for his actions, Ross's outbursts robbed Joseph's wife of an opportunity to confront him directly while she read her victim impact statement. Ross's defense attorney begged the judge to sentence the belligerent defendant to the minimum term of 15 years, pointing out that he had no past criminal record. But the convicted killer's cold and calculated actions spoke out for themselves, and he was sentenced to the maximum of 25 years to life. 10. Drunk double trouble. Most adults understand that there are consequences for acting out of line in public, especially when you're at an airport. But a pair of sisters allegedly got too drunk to care about their behavior as they waited to board a flight to Dublin at the Newark International Airport in New Jersey. When an airline employee told the women that they wouldn't be able to fly because of how intoxicated they were, they only grew more disruptive. Airport police were called to the scene, where one of the women was caught on camera claiming to be a lawyer and warning the police that there'd be consequences if they arrested her. A bystander who recorded the viral footage in a TikTok explained that the women had been acting erratically. The clip proceeded to show one of the sisters jumping up and down and screaming for help from onlookers, who didn't seem the slightest bit interested in getting involved. The more vocal brunette woman seemed unwilling to stop running her mouth, while her blonde sister stood to the side and cried, seemingly unwilling to accept the fact that their Irish vacation wasn't going to happen. A Port Authority spokesperson said that the women were drunk and that they were eventually taken into custody after several attempts to de-escalate the situation failed. Both sisters were charged with disorderly conduct, while the more outspoken of the two received an extra charge for resisting arrest. 9. Rosemary Hayne. In September 2023, when 39-year-old Rosemary Hayne disapproved of how her food was prepared at a Chipotle in Parma, Ohio, she went from 0 to 100 on the innocent employee who served her. Footage of the interaction showed Hayne approaching the counter, slamming her bowl down before throwing it in Emily Russell, the worker's, face. Hayne was soon arrested for her behavior and was found guilty of assault. The judge gave her 2 options for punishment: 90 days in jail or 30 days in jail plus 2 months suspended if she worked at least 20 hours a week herself at a fast food restaurant. She chose the latter, which the judge saw as a good opportunity to learn a valuable lesson about empathy and a preferable alternative to having her sit and eat taxpayer-funded food at jail for 3 months. While handing down the sentence, the judge reprimanded Hayne for her behavior, saying that she acted like she was in a reality show, and said that he hoped the punishment would help her mature. Russell, the worker who was at the hearing, told Fox 8 News that she thought the punishment was fair and that it wasn't a simple slap on the wrist. Hayne apologized to Russell, but pointed out that the food looked disgusting, at which point the judge gently reminded her that she probably wasn't going to enjoy jail food much better. 8. Plane passengers meltdown over crying baby. Nobody loves to sit near a screaming baby while on a commercial flight, but it still happens. Most of the time, people understand that babies will cry and maintain their composure, even if they grow frustrated or annoyed. But this wasn't the case for a man who completely lost his temper during a Southwest Airlines flight from Baltimore to Fort Lauderdale, Florida in April 2023. At the time, the plane was hovering over its destination in a holding pattern thanks to bad weather. Passengers started to grow impatient as the aircraft flew around in circles for well over an hour. An already tense situation got even worse when a male passenger became noticeably irritated by the sound of an innocent baby crying. In a viral TikTok captured by a fellow flyer, the man was heard mentioning how the child had been crying for about 40 minutes. He then started swearing as he ordered a flight attendant to force the baby to quiet down. The poor flight attendant told the man to lower his voice and stop yelling needlessly, but he replied with a snide remark about how the baby was yelling. A passenger named Mark Gabrowski later told WJZ News that passengers were initially shocked by the man's behavior. Like most people, he and other flyers understood that a screaming infant can be annoying, but it's just one of those things you have to politely put up with. It's not like the parents enjoy listening to their child cry either. Grabowski and several others tried to calm the man down and asked him to take a deep breath, but he allegedly doubled down and grew even more confrontational. Instead of landing in Fort Lauderdale as planned, the plane was instead diverted to Orlando, where the man was quickly removed from the aircraft. According to WJZ, the passenger was met by police inside the airport, but was not arrested for the meltdown. 7. Megan Keane. In 2023, 23-year-old former prostitute Megan Keane was working as an adult chat room operator for a British platform called Babe Station when police officers raided her home in Hanley, North Staffordshire in response to an anonymous tip about a marijuana growth operation. The team noticed a strong cannabis odor in the home, but found no evidence that it was currently being grown at the property. They did, however, recover a small amount of marijuana and an illegal canister full of pepper spray, so they told Keane that she was under arrest. The young woman told the officers that she had work to finish, only to learn that you cannot schedule an arrest for your own convenience. She allegedly then erupted into a 15-minute temper tantrum while being taken into custody. According to a police report, Keane shouted, swore, waved her arms around wildly, and even kicked at the officers, who placed her in leg restraints. She eventually settled down and told investigators that a friend gave her the pepper spray because of her line of work. Keane pleaded guilty to 1 weapon-related charge and 1 drug count. During her sentencing, the judge acknowledged that the defendant had a difficult upbringing and that her work as a prostitute exposed her to many difficult individuals, including someone who followed her several years earlier. She used the pepper spray on the man, and the police knew about it, but didn't confiscate the spray or mention anything about it. Considering the circumstances, the judge was forgiving enough to forego a jail sentence and released Keane with orders to pay a fine. 6. Carrington Elise Harris. An elderly Louisiana couple didn't mind housing their 22-year-old granddaughter, but they still expected the young woman to practice basic hygiene. It's not that much to ask in the grand scheme of things, but when Carrington Elise Harris allegedly started to slack on her bathing regularly in August 2023, her grandparents asked her to jump in the shower. Instead of being embarrassed that she had to be told to wash herself despite being a grown adult, the young woman reportedly threw a temper tantrum. According to the victims, Harris destroyed several things inside the house and then went outside and cut their power supply. Her grandparents later claimed that they tried to restrain her, but the young woman managed to free herself before grabbing a kitchen knife. Caddo Parish deputies responded to the home in Keithville, where they discovered the grandfather injured after being stabbed in the face. By the time law enforcement got there, Harris had already run off into the woods behind their home. She was found in the forest several hours afterwards and was booked into the Caddo Parish Jail on charges of domestic abuse battery and domestic abuse battery with a dangerous weapon. As of December 2023, Harris still remains held without bail. 5. Carlito Jr Milford. After discovering evidence that her boyfriend and the father of her child were texting other girls, a Florida woman confronted 24-year-old Carlito Jr Milford at her house in Coral Springs. Also known by his stage name Poor Stacy, Milford reacted to the woman's questions with a violent and childish tantrum. He apparently didn't like being called out on his infidelity, and instead of discussing the situation like an adult, he was accused of punching and slapping his girlfriend before dragging her by her hair. The victim later told police officers that Milford threatened to kill her and her pets, destroyed various items, threw a hamster cage at the woman's head with the animal still inside it, and slammed a baby bassinet down onto the floor. All because she confronted him about his shady activity, which she had every right to do. According to a police report, Milford even barricaded himself inside the home and refused to come out when law enforcement reached the scene. He eventually surrendered and was booked into the Broward County Jail on suspicion of battery as well as child neglect. 4. China's corruption crackdown. In early 2013, when a Chinese construction boss named Yan Lingkun learned that he missed his flight at an airport in Yunnan province, he erupted into a violent tirade. A bystander hit the record button on their phone as an employee tried explaining to Yan that the plane had already left for Shenzhen. His reaction was indifferent at first, as if he couldn't believe that the plane didn't wait for him, and his behavior soon winded down into a rage-filled tantrum. The camera was still rolling as Yan proceeded to destroy 2 computers and a telephone before tearing down a poster frame and banging it repeatedly against the door to the flight gate. Instead of getting involved, a crowd of onlookers simply stood around and stared at the scene. The video quickly went viral and Yan was suspended from his job. He was also threatened with punishment by the political advisory board he was a member of. Jan was quick to apologize to the airport's manager and to the public, admitting that his behavior was irrational and rude. The outburst came amid Chinese President Xi Jinping's heightened effort to crack down on corruption, which resulted in a lot of public fits by high-ranking individuals made public. During that same week, a Communist Party official from Nanyang City, named Liu Xiangzheng, rammed his car into a movie theater. According to the official report, he accidentally got the gas and brake pedals mixed up, but he'd recently been out of work, supposedly for medical purposes, and it's only natural to wonder if there was more to that story. Meanwhile, in Shaanxi, a former official named Yang Datsai came under suspicion of corruption thanks to photographs of him flaunting designer watches that people can't typically afford on his public office salary. Several months earlier, he was caught smiling in a picture taken at the scene of a horrific car accident that claimed around 36 lives, proving that, at the very best, sensitivity wasn't one of his best traits. Social media users were so angry with the photo that they embarked on a mission to find dirt on Yang, leading them to notice that he was living well beyond his means. In China, criticism of politicians is usually ignored at best and punished at worst. So Yang probably wasn't expecting it when law enforcement took people's suspicions about him seriously. He was ultimately stripped of his post and arrested. Yang ended up pleading guilty to accepting $41,000 in bribes and having $800,000 of shady money in his possession, and was sentenced to serve 14 years in prison. 3. Jeie Sanders. When a LaPorte County, Indiana man realized that his truck was missing one day in April 2023, he reported it stolen and told the authorities that he believed his sister, 33-year-old Jeie Sanders, was the culprit. The man tracked Sanders down at a home in Michigan City, where he later claimed to find the woman passed out after drinking alcohol. He left without finding his truck that day, and Sanders left the home a little while later in a different car. Police spotted Sanders driving along a dirt road not long after and pulled her over. She told them she left her brother's truck in a park and was taken to a nearby hospital for a blood draw to measure her level of intoxication. As the brother got his vehicle back, Sanders allegedly tried attacking hospital staff members who were attempting to draw a blood sample. She was also accused of kicking employees and trying to bite a police officer, while waving her arms around wildly to stop them from taking her blood. According to police officers, Sanders also pretended like she couldn't breathe, faked a heart attack, and pretended to fall unconscious. The troubled detainee's blood alcohol content was never revealed, but she reportedly admitted to drinking a fifth of vodka every day. Sanders was later charged with felony operating while intoxicated thanks to a previous DWI conviction, along with 1 count each of resisting law enforcement and obstruction of justice. Records show that she was arrested again only 4 months later on a felony theft charge, although the circumstances of that incident are unclear. 2. Clint Freeberg. Police officers in Grand Chute, Wisconsin, responded to a call from a local stadium in July 2023 after hearing about a truck being damaged in the parking lot during a Timber Rattlers minor league baseball game. After arriving at the scene, officers met a victim whose Chevy Silverado had been keyed. They wrote the man's complaint down and were informed the next day that the value of the damage was estimated at nearly $4,200. The victim told police that several people reached out to him on social media about the alleged culprit, who one anonymous individual identified as 31-year-old Clint Freeberg. At the same time, other complaints poured in about multiple vehicles being damaged during the game. Victims also offered additional photos and video of the supposed suspect, who investigators identified as Freeberg. By the time police confronted Freeberg at his house, at least 18 or 19 people had complained about their cars being vandalized. A sergeant initially confronted him about one of the vehicles, which Freeberg quickly admitted to keying. He apparently said that he had a temper tantrum during a disagreement with a woman at the game who he thought had a connection to the car's owner. Freeberg also admitted that he didn't know the man who owned the vehicle, but he still took his uncontrolled anger out on the victim's property. When the sergeant asked Freeberg about all the other damaged cars, he denied responsibility. The sergeant said that it was strange how he claimed to only vandalize one vehicle, yet so many others had been damaged similarly. At the cop's request, Freeberg finally admitted to getting mad and keying all the cars. He laughed while he made the confession, prompting the sergeant to ask him why he did it and to remind him that he wasn't a teenager anymore. The only explanation Freeberg offered was that he was angry with the woman he was arguing with. Some of the cars had a line keyed straight down the middle, while others had different markings, including one car that had "Hi, how are you?" scratched into the body. When asked about why he chose more elaborate designs for some vehicles and just keyed a line down others, he allegedly smiled and looked away while saying he wasn't sure. Freeberg was initially charged with one felony count of criminal damage to property, which can carry a prison sentence of over 3 years and a fine of up to $10,000 if convicted. 3 months later, Outagamie County prosecutors announced that he was facing 46 counts of criminal damage to property, including 24 separate felony counts. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Gin and tonic pre-flight meltdown. In a cringeworthy outburst caught on camera in April 2023, a grown man broke into tears when he was denied a gin and tonic as he waited for an American Airlines flight to take off. It's unclear why flight attendants refused to give him the drink, but he allegedly didn't want to take no for an answer. Viral footage posted by an anonymous Reddit user showed the first-class passenger arguing with airport officers, who tried getting him off the plane. The man was heard asking why he was being forced off the flight, and a staff member replied that the pilot requested his removal several times thanks to his disrespectful and argumentative behavior. Instead of following orders, the man remained stubbornly sat in his seat. At one point, he even started to record the incident with his own phone, which was quickly taken from him by one of the officers. Annoyed passengers soon began yelling for the disgruntled passenger to cooperate and get off the plane so the flight could proceed as scheduled. After giving the man many opportunities to voluntarily remove himself from the plane, the officers decided to pull him out of his seat and wrestle him into handcuffs. He started sobbing audibly and lost one of his sneakers in the process. But he could have avoided the embarrassing takedown simply by doing what he was told. Naturally, internet users had a field day, with many people likening the man to an entitled child crying out for their mommy. Sadly, this was just one in a seemingly endless stream of stories about disruptive passengers on flights that have increasingly made headlines in recent years.
7. Too pretty for prison. Lauren Cutshaw was pulled over in August of 2018 for speeding. The officer who pulled her over claimed that Cutshaw was straight-up belligerent drunk. However, Cutshaw claimed that she only had 2 glasses of wine that entire evening. The story is pretty standard so far. Someone gets pulled over and tries to talk their way out of getting a ticket or getting arrested. The dashcam footage, however, revealed an interesting take. Cutshaw trying to talk her way out of possible jail time by claiming that she was too pretty to be arrested. The 34-year-old former cheerleader and real estate agent told the arresting officer that she was a clean, thoroughbred white girl. Her blood alcohol levels were found to be 0.18%, and she was escorted back to the squad car in handcuffs. While being led to the car, Cutshaw made repeated claims that her partner was also an officer. that she belonged to a good neighborhood, how she used to be a cheerleader and was in a sorority, and how she should not be taken into custody because she was too pretty to be in prison. The officer responded to her claims with, "What does that have to do with anything?" To which Cutshaw replied, "You're a cop? You know what it means?" Implying that she would be treated poorly by fellow prisoners because of her attractive features. Somehow, Lauren Cutshaw managed to get away with a $187 fine and court-ordered alcohol counseling. The dash cam footage of her claiming that she was too pretty for prison went viral shortly ahead of her trial. 6. Cannibal walks free. Issei Sagawa was born into a wealthy family. He was from Japan but had moved to Paris for school. In June of 1981, the unthinkable happened. One night he invited his classmate, Renee Hartevelt, back to his apartment to study and to help him translate some poetry. Sagawa was a short, meek man compared to Hartevelt. While Hartevelt was sitting at a desk in his apartment with her back turned towards him, Sagawa shot her in the back of the head, killing her. Hartevelt died immediately, and Sagawa claims that he fainted from the shock of what he had just done. When he regained consciousness moments later, he carried out his original plan, to have intercourse with her corpse, dismember her, and then devour her. In his confession, Sagawa claimed that he believed he could absorb Hartevelt's energy if he ate her. But let's go back to that horrible night. Sagawa's teeth were not sharp enough to bite through Hartevelt's skin and resorted to using a butcher knife to slice into her. He chopped her body up into small pieces, threw some of those pieces in a plastic bag, and stored it in the fridge. According to Sagawa's confession, he saved the fattest parts to eat later. Sagawa was caught when he tried to dump Hartevelt's body that he stuffed in a suitcase nearby at a public lake. Reportedly, a suspicious person walked by him, came up to him, and demanded to know what he was carrying in his suitcase. Call it a hunch. This is where the case gets even more interesting. Not only did Sagawa confess, he provided detailed descriptions of what he wanted to do with the remaining parts of Hartevelt's body had he not been caught. Sagawa also had a previous criminal charge of attempted rape in Japan. However, after serving less than 10 months in prison, Sagawa was released on the grounds of insanity, and his original trial was deemed as a mistrial because of unlawful psychological evaluation. The Japanese trust fund kid was deported back to Japan, where he began to live the life of a sensationalized celebrity. Because the charges in France had been dropped, the court documents were sealed and could not be released to Japanese authorities. Therefore, the Japanese had no case against Sagawa and no choice but to let him go. Sagawa became popular in his country as the man who had killed a woman and then ate her body. What is he up to today? Today, Issei Sagawa walks the streets of Tokyo, free to do as he pleases. 5. The Menendez Brothers. Joseph Lyle and Eric Galen Menendez are siblings born in 1968 and 1970, respectively. Their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, were quite wealthy and moved to the States from their hometown in Havana, Cuba. The couple maintained their lavish lifestyle in their new location. The family originally moved to New Jersey before settling in Beverly Hills, California. Both brothers received their education from Beverly Hills High. On the surface, everything seemed to be going fine in the Menendez household. Everyone had everything they could ever hope for and then some. However, something sinister was going on behind closed doors. Their father, Jose, had been sexually, physically, and emotionally abusing his sons for years. Jose would routinely threaten the boys if they ever exposed him. Kitty was allegedly an unwitting accomplice to Jose's crimes against the boys. On the evening of August 20th in 1987, Eric and Lyle came home to find their parents sleeping on the couch. The brothers first shot Jose with a single gunshot wound. Kitty woke up from the commotion and tried to escape. The boys shot her multiple times, leaving her body unrecognizable. They shot both of their parents in the knees to make the murders look mob-related. The brothers then called 911 and told them that their parents had just been killed. The police immediately considered the young men suspects but had no leads. So the police had no choice but to believe that mob leaders really were involved in the deaths of Jose and Kitty. It wasn't until Eric broke down and confessed in front of his therapist, and he subsequently revealed the confession to his mistress, that the brothers were arrested. The two brothers reportedly spent close to $1 million in the months following their parents' murder. They spent money on a dual condo, several designer cars, tennis lessons, and other extravagant purchases. While the brothers and witnesses gave evidence of sexual abuse being committed, a jury eventually found both of them guilty. Eric and Lyle Menendez were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of their parents. What do you think about this case? Do you think it's fair that Joseph and Eric got life in prison after the trauma their parents put them through? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. 4. Getting away with murder. Again. Seymour Durst is known as the inventor of the national debt clock, for being one of the wealthiest men of his time, and for starting a real estate empire. His son, Robert Durst, is known for being a serial killer who got away with 3 murders: his wife's, his neighbor's, and one of his friends. Durst was born in April of 1943 as the eldest of the Durst children. Robert was in line to become the heir of the Durst organization, originally founded in 1927 by his grandfather. As a child, his therapist noticed several odd behavioral tics in the boy: sibling rivalry, narcissism, and isolation, all which he received regular therapy sessions for. Durst was reportedly never interested in taking over the Durst organization, and instead started a food and wellness store in the 1970s. His father eventually called him back to New York to take over the real estate empire, but had to withdraw from his decision when he noted Robert acting inappropriately on more than one occasion. The empire was then given to his brother Douglas, and Robert was bought out of the family share of the empire for $7 million. Robert has been connected to 3 murders. All 3 began as disappearances: Catherine McCormick, Susan Berman, and Morris Black. Robert had met McCormick in 1971 while he was running his health and wellness store in Vermont. The two were married by 1973. The marriage was turbulent, to say the least. McCormick reportedly asked Durst for a divorce several times, but Durst would always blackmail her back into the relationship. In 1982, McCormick went missing after attending a party at a friend's home. She was never found. Longtime friend Susan Berman was found murdered in her home execution style in December of 2000. Although Durst was the last person to have allegedly met with Berman before her body was found, there was no case against him. It wasn't until Durst's neighbor, Morris Black, was dismembered in 2001 that police began looking into Durst as a possible serial killer. The trial began, and there was substantial evidence against him. However, all of it was deemed as inadmissible in court. The only conviction Durst received was for the murder of Susan Berman. Durst had been presented in court on multiple occasions: 2003, 2005, 2015, and 2020, the last of which got him a conviction of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, bail jumping, illegally possessing a firearm, and misdemeanor criminal mischief. For decades, Durst was a free man. Now, at 78 years old, he is currently serving time in California's state prison. 3. A murderer and a philanthropist. John DuPont was born into a wealthy family and inherited a large chunk of land from his maternal grandfather. He studied science, excelled in his field, and made smart investments. In 1987, it was reported that DuPont was worth $200 million. To date, he's the only man from the Forbes 400 list to have been charged with murder. DuPont developed a 400-acre wrestling facility for amateur wrestlers at Lissitor Hall Farm in Newtown Square. The private group was known as Team Foxcatcher. The state-of-the-art facility was equipped with pools, gyms, and everything necessary for training. Dave Schultz was an Olympian freestyle training wrestler living at DuPont's estate. Schultz was just one of many freestyle wrestlers living at the wealthy philanthropist estate in the 1990s. DuPont made it a point to have Olympians come live under his wing and train alongside some of the greatest trainers in the world. Although not a wrestler himself, DuPont was simply obsessed with the sport. In January of 1996, DuPont shot Dave Schultz 3 times. The crime was witnessed by his wife and head of security. Reportedly, DuPont acted as if nothing had really happened and just sat back in the car after committing the murder. The trial was sensationalized for several reasons: DuPont's wealth, his philanthropy, his erratic behavior leading up to the murder, and the fact that he refused to incriminate himself even with 2 eyewitnesses to the crime. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity at trial in February of 1997. A court eventually ruled that he was guilty, but mentally ill. For the murder of Dave Schultz, DuPont received 13 to 30 years in prison. He would have been a free man in 2026, but died in prison in 2010 at the age of 72. 2. Cameron Douglas's side career as a drug kingpin. You're probably familiar with the celebrity Michael Douglas, who has several Academy Awards and accolades to his name. He's received a hefty number of nominations and awards for his contributions in film and media throughout his career. However, his son, Cameron Douglas, received none of the fame and all of the notoriety. Cameron was training to be an actor and had several small roles in film before his arrest in 2011. He got busted in 1999 when he was found in possession of cocaine and charged with a misdemeanor and the possession of a controlled substance. 10 years later, in 2009, Cameron was arrested after it was discovered that he was involved in a serious drug trafficking ring. The DEA had been working a sting on the case for 3 years before arresting Cameron in Manhattan. He had been caught distributing several pounds of methamphetamine out of a Manhattan hotel. Although Cameron Douglas should have gone to jail, he was placed on house arrest, probably because of who his father was. In 2010, he was found in violation of the arrest when his girlfriend was found smuggling drugs to him. Douglas was then sent to a maximum security prison. The next year, in 2011, he was busted once again when it was found out that he had been receiving drugs through prison routes. From 2012 to 2014, Cameron Douglas was placed in solitary confinement due to his erratic behavior and the prison facility's claims that they could not handle the prisoner's drug use anymore. While Douglas was set to serve a longer prison sentence, he was eventually released in 2016. Cameron Douglas was released to a halfway house in August of 2016 after having spent 7 years behind bars and 2 years in segregated housing. Today, the once aspiring actor lives quietly with his long-term partner and 2 children. But is he really just living a simple life? Or has he just not been caught yet, doing something he shouldn't be doing? 1. Hank's payout. In California in August of 2015, Chester Marlon Hanks was reportedly driving while under the influence and collided with Terry Mugen's vehicle. While both drivers were unscathed by the accident and the damages were repairable, Mugen decided he wanted to pursue a legal claim against Chester and his parents, Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson. Mugen stated the grounds for his case against the Hanks family was because Chester was no stranger to making bad decisions. A self-proclaimed black sheep, Chester had been arrested and fined in 1999 in Britain for the possession of illegal substances. His ex-girlfriend was awarded a restraining order against him for verbal and physical abuse. Despite this, Mugen's claim alleges that the Hanks family facilitated Chester's behavior by allowing him to drive a vehicle knowing he was capable of inflicting harm. Mugen tried suing the Hanks family for well over $1 million, although nothing has come out of the case yet. To us, this just sounds like a bitter person coming after the son of a celebrity because they believe it'll get a big payout. What do you think?
Thanks for watching. Would you rather go viral for being a bratty, entitled chump, or for doing something truly sinister and diabolical? Why do you think one would be worse than the other? Let us know in the comments below.